Okay, there's different ways to measure an angle. We've been doing degrees. There's also something we're going to start today called radians. And then there's also for roads, they use gradients, which I'm not even sure. I've never looked into that one, but I know there's gradients. So what they did is this for a radian, is they said, we're going to take a circle, and when we draw our angle, instead of talking about the distance here, we're going to measure how much of the circle that's cut by these rays of the angle there is. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to use a 1 unit circle. Now, if you remember way back, probably 7th grade, the circumference of a circle is 2 pi times the radius. So if the radius is 1, the distance of the whole circle is 2 pi. 1 times 2 pi. Well, we also know that in degrees, the distance around a complete circle is 360. So they said, ah ha ha ha, 2 pi equals 360. Wow, that's off the page. Sorry about that. So pi equals 180. So that's our conversion formula. So if we want to go to radians, you multiply by pi over 180. If we want to go to degrees, you multiply by 180 over pi. Now to go to radians, you could also say every 180 is a pi. To go to degrees, you can say every pi is 180. So let's say I say how many radians in 270. So you would say, well, okay, we would go pi over 180 times 270. So reduced by 90, you'd have 3 pi over Q. So 90 degrees times 180, times pi over 180, if you're converting to radians, that'd be pi over 2. So, if you look at a coordinate system, this is 0, this is pi over 2, this is 2 pi over 2, which is pi, 3 pi over 2, you just keep adding a pi over 2, and then this would be 2 pi, and then you could just keep going. So this is 4 pi, and then 6 pi. Now, let's say I want to go in reverse. Let's say I say, okay, what's pi over 3 in degrees? Well, you could do it 2 ways. You could do 180 over pi. That's our conversion. Or you could just change your pi to 180. Because that's what a pi is. It's 180 degrees. Remember I kept telling you that 180 is 3 times your 1? That's because 180 is your pi. And pi is 3.14 blah, blah, blah. So pi over 3, pi, is the same as 60 degrees. Now, if we were going to spend a couple weeks on this, I would make you memorize most of this, but we're not. So if I say, hey, what is sine pi over 6? Well, what I would recommend, what I would recommend is change it to degrees first. Change it to degrees first, Then use your little chart. Do you have a little chart still handy? So we would say, okay, to go from radians, and how do I know it's radians? It's got a pi. Most of the time, radians has a pi. It doesn't have to, but most of the time. So you'd either use the formula 180 over pi, that's to go from radians to degrees, or just take your pi and put a 180 in it. So this would be sine 180 over 6, which is sine 30. And in past years, you'd have to know by heart, sine 30 is a half. So if I said, okay, what's cosine of, let's say, pi? Well, again, I would change it to degrees. If we were spending weeks on this, then okay, you should know your radians, but we're not. So I'd say this is cosine 180. Oh, it's a multiple of 90. That's a quadrantal angle. Quadrantal angle, we pick a point. That's negative 1, 0. Ooh-hoo-hoo. And cosine is x over r. X is negative 1, r is 1. So it'd be negative 1. So if I said, what's the tangent of 3 pi over 4? Well, pi is 180. Divided by 4, that's 45. Times 3 is 135. So we need to do reference angles. It's not a multiple of 90. Oops. So here's 135. Tangent's negative in the second quadrant. All students take classes. So it would be negative tangent of 45. Let's move it up there. That's a little better. I don't know why it's getting dark down here. And tangent of 45 is 1. Use your chart. Yoo-hoo. Just try 1 for me. Just 1. All I asked is 1. Sine of 7 pi over 6. Change it to degrees and then use reference angle and figure it out. Okay. You should have froze me. Pi divided by, or 180 divided by 6 is 30, so that's 210. 210 is in the, third quadrant. Sine is negative in the third quadrant. And this would be 30 degrees. And looking at your chart, you should know sine of 30 is a half. Okay, tomorrow we're going to work on this some more. As long as my AT&T keeps holding out, which they say it will, and then they send me a letter saying I got a problem, then I call them and they say, no, you don't. So I don't know. But anyways, see you tomorrow. No homework. Hey.